This is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing our work on the 2023 budget adjustment. And so we have Stephanie Barrett from Joint Fiscal, who's going to walk us through the web report as well as maybe crosswalk some of the language.
This would be like the goal to try and get through the end of tomorrow, at least one walkthrough through the budget adjustment bill.
Yeah.
And we start with the web report. That's the money section in the front of the bill. It's easiest to follow it through the web report because it's hard to follow when you do it from the bill itself, because we show the position changes from the governor and the House, and then we've added a few that you agreed to yesterday in the Senate. So it's a working copy. It's up on the website in the committee page today. We also got the technical letter from Finance and Management, which is different than the Secretary's letter yesterday, where he's noting some items. Several of them are related to what we went through yesterday, but we'll consider that as we hit these sections. If
It's not a dear letter.
No, it's not. It's just a
memo
memo.
to.
Yeah.
Not technical. It's not technical.
No, I'm going to do it first. All right. So we have 3 documents now before us, but this is very helpful.
This is what we're starting.
This really shows what the governor proposed, what the House did, if anything, and to a large extent, they agreed with what was in the governor's proposed.
And when we get to the one-time section, that's where the most activity was. So we're just going to start at the beginning. B105, section B105 is the Agency of Digital Services. You see a significant down in the special fund line that, as you may recall, is related to mostly IT projects that we funded here through the new IT modernization fund, but they're not going away. They're just being moved to a one-time appropriation out of the fund because they're each individual projects. They did not want to see them in the base of the special fund for ADS. There's also a very small adjustment related to the Municipal Regional Planning Fund, GIS piece that's embedded in here as well. But there was no change made on the House, and that is the only change being made in the general government function total in the budget adjustment. So no other entities in the general government function.
Okay. So in essence, the only change here is taking one-time money out of the base, putting it in a
different place. We'll see.
And it's for IT, and it's not changing anything other than just where the money is being moved to.
Exactly.
And the purpose is still the same. So, all right. So that's it for general government, and I'm going to close it unless somebody has got a problem with it. Right along.
Next page, protection. So B209 is state police. And you see what we heard from the state police when they were in a week ago or so. It's a $201,000 down. On January 6th, it was a $2 million or so up. But in the interim, the governor determined that they could get an allocation for the pay act. And so that's what you see here.
And we knew if they'd known it earlier,
we might not be here.
A 201 would not be here. So
they might still have that.
And that was the 8% increase.
So yeah, so they are, the pay act is accommodating the contract.
So
and the total cost of the contract was about 3.3, being offset by vacancy savings within the state police, and offset now with a pay act allocation that they didn't realize they were going to have a few weeks ago.
All right. So
section B209, I assume, is closed.
Yes.
B225 and B225.2. This is simply, you see 250 coming out of 225 and going into 225.2. We just lodged the money for the conservation districts in the wrong spot last year, I believe. So we need to just move it down into the clean water, and that's all that's happening there. It's a net neutral move. Cannabis Control Board, I believe, stays open. So we heard from the board before the notice on the impacted products and testing. And so you see the adjustment in the governor's change column of additional spending authority that they need related to their space, of the 540. There was no change made on the House side, but I would assume you would be giving them additional spending authority here when we do the funding for the testing through a transfer. So this one probably stays open until you have the precise number that you want to put in.
Well, the only thing is upfront money would be a one-time,
And that
so that wouldn't go here.
it could go here. I think you'd want to actually have them have one funding source, the special fund funding source. You would just see it go back down next year. When you.
Well, whatever works from, the budget perspective. I think there was agreement that we absolutely have to assure the quality of the product.
Yeah.
The 850 one time and then set up the lab, so.
So the transfer into the special fund is a one-time, and I would up that transfer to cover the lab and then increase the spending authority here, and they could go forward.
And they also needed the money to cover the lab testing till the end of the year.
Yeah, that's, yes,
And that was part of the 540?
I believe that is part of the 540.
So was space and the private testing.
Yes. And that way, if you keep it that way, they only deal with one funding source. And, you will be funding them in 24 with what they need for 24. It won't impact the transfer is made on a one-time basis. It won't. The reason the IT wanted to pull out is because each project had its own appropriation.
So the source of the special fund will be.
So the source of the special fund right now in FY23 is the fee revenue that they're collecting, plus a significant amount of money that you have transferred in from the general fund. It's over $4 million, I think.
So we transferred enough to cover most of this.
You have that. What's not in the transfer yet, and what won't be covered by fees is what's needed for the lab startup. That's what you would be adjusting here.
So the 850, for example, will come out of what?
It would come out of the general fund if you're doing it in 23. If you're going to postpone and wait and give them that spending authority in 24, it would come out of the revenue from the.
I think we need to get moving on it.
Yeah, so I think you're going to do it as a general fund transfer and give them the spending authority.
That was my understanding yesterday, but then when you're talking about special funds, that was.
And this is just to keep them administratively simple so that they don't have to. We don't appropriate general fund to them. We transfer general fund to them.
So how are you going to give them general fund that is general fund?
When we get into this section of the bill,
You will
there's
do
a
it.
line item that transfers money to the cannabis fund from the general fund, and we'll change that number by $850,000.
All right,
They'll
so,
match up with each other.
all right, so what we're doing is including the additional cost of space, we will in the end adjust for the 850 that's coming in.
The
to give
850
us
is the ask for the.
startup equipment. And then in this 23 would be what's in the 540 to pay the tab for private testing. And when we build the 24 budget, we've got to add the positions and the funding.
Yeah, I would actually advise you to add, create the
We should do the
positions.
positions
You
here,
create the positions, but you don't need funding for them until you get to 24.
so they can get started on them.
But once the positions are created, they can start recruiting.
So have they started taking in any revenue?
Yes.
So the excise tax is coming in FY23 into the general fund, and their fee revenue is coming into their special fund. The construct after 23 for a couple of years is to have the excise tax flow through their special fund and then direct out the remainder to the general fund, of which a portion is for prevention. And that is to see how they sugar off essentially in terms of what the size and actual running beyond the startup cost piece are, and then review, and then it would shift back to the general fund. But because there's a significant difference between the fee revenue that they're projected to collect and their operating costs, the decision was to have the excise tax cover it for now, so we don't have ballooning deficits over time, and then understand in a few years how we want to structure their funding, their operating funding.
Yes.
A question, so the sales tax goes to the education fund, but is earmarked somehow for after-school programs? or-
It is, it's embedded in the sales tax, like the entire hundreds of million dollars of sales tax goes to the ed fund. The excise tax is its own line item in the general fund. You can infer the amount of that sales tax because it's just a quick calculation. The sales the sales tax is 6%, the excise tax is 14. So you can just do the math and say of the collections in any given month that had an excise tax.
That's just, so that'll just automatically go to the after school.
So the education fund, I believe, is probably carrying a line item right now, starting in 23 or 24 for after school. That statute probably needs some clarity added to it. It was a little bit loose or broad, how you want to direct that money. But because of the way it's set up, it's creating a special line, a new line item in the ed fund for that.
Would it be within AOE? Or that's not clear?
You would have to determine how the revenue, how we identify the revenue is sort of clear, how you mechanically send out that capacity from the ed fund is to be determined, I think.
Okay, and so we don't at this point know what the estimate of the sales tax into the education.
It might be on the bottom of the sheet you're looking at.
23, 2 million, yeah, 2 million.
And it's
And the total revenue from fees and, well, that's a transfer from the general fund, 3 million. So we don't have much. The transfer from the general fund is what's carrying the board at this point.
it's board at this point.
Because we didn't want to start out with a deficit. We had enough money to upfront.
Because it's creating a deficit in a brand new fund just gets you a note in your audited financials.
So,
But you don't have to have it, you can cover it.
but right now, we're, in the beginning stages, there isn't a lot of money, but 24, according to the projection here, and when we get into this more, but this, I just happen to have this stuff, he handed it to me a while back, is sales tax in 24 is 4.2 million, and that would be for after school, and then in 24, total revenue is anticipated to be about 11.1.
On the sales tax.
Well, it would be the fees and the excise tax. So 11.1. And then that's how we would fund prevention. And I know that, the health department's working on prevention. And I've suggested, well, because the folks from mentoring are obviously wanting more money. And I said, feel free to tell the health department, but I view mentoring and after-school programs really would think that that would be a logical funding stream to support mentoring, because these are all kids at risk. I think they're more at risk than, kids against tobacco, which tend to be the.
But the kids that get tobacco have lost ground because of lack of resources, and so we're seeing an increase.
Some of the kids that I know from my school are not at risk.
Yeah.
Well, I think the mentoring kids are truly where having an adult.
I see what you mean, yeah.
So anyway, that's where we are. So at this point, then, well, keep this open, but our plan is the 540 covers the additional space costs, the private testing until we get our own setup, and we will create the 3 positions that have been requested in the budget
startup for the
adjustment, so we can get them online for July or as close as possible. Okay, so we'll keep that open with those changes, but everybody, the changes, okay? All right, so let's keep going here.
So that closes out protection, and now we're into the main meat of the money moving pieces of the budget adjustment, which is human services. And this is where we're gonna also cross-reference to the technical letter that we just got. The pieces that are in the central office in the governor's change column,
The total 22.6.
yeah.
The house changed to 1.7.
So they doubled the emergency housing, traditional housing complex place management staffing backfill amount because they were bringing it to, they funded, within the governor's $2 million is also 1.7 for transitional housing complex place management staffing. And the House added double that amount because they were extending the wraparound services. I've asked how that aligns with the housing stability services that are funded in the ERAP 2 plan.
The next 3 years.
And what you see in the note from, on the technical memo is if a significant amount of one-time money is included to extend emergency housing, or if emergency is extended for 1 quarter, they would say that this only needs to be in here for the 1.7 added by the House would only, this reflects 6 months as opposed to a quarter, where the 1.7 added by the governor got you to the end of March. So it's a decision that sort of goes together in addition to what the House added was $21 million.
Okay, so this is in addition to the 21, which was to pay for rooms. And that's, we've talked about it, and we'll need to review, but in fact, the House added a very elaborate study which duplicates the study. It's just, if we don't like the results or it makes difficult decisions, then we ask for another study. And in the meantime, the rooms are limited, and sometimes the most vulnerable aren't the ones getting the rooms. So it's not as simple as it might seem. But the question becomes one of whether the 1.7, if we want to say, let's assume that we say we're going to proceed as was originally envisioned, and that is the cold weather exemption ends April 1st, and then what we do is go back to our general assistance program as it has always functioned, and that would be to address the emergency housing needs of our most vulnerable, and that would be people with families with children, people who have a disability, or people who are elderly. So I think there's kind of confusion that somehow when what we set up with the COVID-related money ended, that there was nothing there, but we've always had that basic protection program. A few years ago, the House actually wanted to get rid of the cold weather exemption for the able-bodied, and we said no. So there's a certain irony here in this discussion, but be that as it may. So we could say, look, for those vulnerable populations that are going to continue to be served, even though it's going to be our general assistance program, we need to provide these supports. But we don't need to do it at the 1.7. It would be half of the 1.7.
Yes.
Okay.
For the technical.
Have I kind of explained that, and because the secretary came in and acknowledged that they were very frustrated at being asked to do another study when they had spent hours. She said she chaired the meeting. People made very tough choices when money is running out and you're trying to figure out that transition out. If you actually, as someone said, you actually have a greater population being ended in June 30th if you continue.
And the people that she pulled together were most of the people doing this work.
Mm-hmm. It was the stakeholders. So, but I think it's just important to remember that the general assistance program is still there. And we can, if in fact the demand for that to protect that vulnerable population should exceed that, well, then we'll deal with it in a budget adjustment. Or we'll deal with it somehow. But the other part is, in last year's budget, we also had $15 million anticipating this last quarter. And so the agency came with a plan of how we would use that 15 million. Then that went to joint fiscal. So we can share that with you. But I'm only using this as an opportunity to kind of bring together disparate pieces that are all influencing this and the work that's already gone on to really study this. And no one is questioning when you start unwinding and you've got to go back to, pre-COVID, that some of the benefits that you could fund with all this federal money just cannot continue to be funded at that level with general fund. And so if people are comfortable, at least with this, recognizing we don't have to make a decision on the emergency housing piece right now, but at least recognizing we only need 1 quarter rather than 6 months. I would say even if we go and say we're going to protect the most vulnerable through our general assistance program, as we had historically, it still would be important to provide case management and services to that population for another quarter. So that would mean cutting this in half and saying, regardless of the decision we made on that 21 million, we want to provide these services to that vulnerable group.
Jane,
Yeah.
in the Dear Jane letter,
Uh-huh.
am I remembering right that the suggestion there is similar to use 11 million for the most vulnerable?
And I'm saying we funded that we're funding it through GA.
Yeah.
Through the regular GA program, because that's what it's designed to do, is meet the emergency housing needs for the most vulnerable. So the Dear Jane letter didn't really endorse spending an 11 million on top of the GA. It wasn't that clear. It wasn't their intent. I checked that with Adam.
Okay.
And they definitely did not want to support that open door on everybody getting eliminating cold weather exemption and just making everybody eligible through June. They felt it was just a larger population that was going to, and they were going to lose the benefit. And as the secretary said, they were competing with very constrained room availability. So you could have the 20-year-old get the room, and the parent with 2 kids end up in the car because there's no room available. So so they were not really endorsing the full 21 million. I think they definitely said we want to shut down the cold weather program for they're basically single able-bodied and in April, like we always do, and address the most vulnerable through GA.
So I'm just taking a look at this says, please note, however, that the administration is open to discussing how to better focus budget adjustment funds on the most vulnerable, and then ... and supporting only these households would cost approximately 11 million.
And that might be to the GA program.
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
So
Yeah.
there is, within the $15 million contingent money that was general fund, there is 4.8 that's set aside for the GA. I don't know if that nets off the 11 as a refined cost estimate or not. We'll find that out. And then I believe those projections are, people stay through the end of June as opposed to some attrition in the program.
So would there be enough left to cover the cost that we want to leave in for this 800 and some thousand?
Yeah.
Might be enough left in.
This doesn't provide the roof over their head. This really provides people going in and working and helping them move out, find other housing, look at support services. Many of them are people with disabilities that are still in those temporary housing arrangements. So this is only the staff services. Well, then the question is, what will be the total cost? And if our GA budget and what we've already done with that 15 million allocation is not sufficient to provide the temporary housing for that vulnerable population, then how we would deal with anything that's over and above what's been appropriated.
Mm-hmm.
But the administration was definitely saying, we need to shut this down, and we are not supportive of extending that open door, and cold weather exemption ends the 1st of April, and then we're going back to business as usual with the GA program. Okay, so but to keep the support services for the vulnerable that remain, people are okay with that, or?
You don't think there'd be enough left to cover that, the vulnerable services without putting half?
No, Stephanie said it was only budgeted for 6 months.
So,
So,
so the governor's number has 1.7 going in for through the end of March.
Yeah.
For services, it's combined with several things on that line. The House added another 1.7.
and we're saying we only need to add half of it, 1.7.
So you're saying the House made a mistake, basically, that
No.
they thought.
Or if they intend, I don't know if they made a mistake or if they intended to
Well,
stretch
why
the
would they?
services beyond that quarter, but it's what's needed if you want to get to the end of 23 is half.
So it's the 1.7 in the governor's proposed plus another 50% that would get us through the end of June.
Yeah.
And the rest would be in the next.
After June.
24, yeah. Well, we would address this question.
So we would need this 800,
It'll be 850 instead of 1.
yes.
So what we would do is,
The Senate would do a negative 850, you'd end up where you.
so we would be 1.7 plus the 850. It'll get us through the end of June. Okay. And don't forget, under the federal rules, that housing support is out there through 26. We have actually apportioned money to support people with their housing and those services. Because everyone knows getting somebody an apartment is only the first step. Many of them are gonna need support in order to maintain and so that's.
There's the whole wraparound
Yeah,
services.
so those services we are funding out for the period of time that we have the ARPA money through 26.
I don't know where we are with, when we get to next year's budget, but the back rent program will come up because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that haven't paid their rent. They got out of and are gonna fall into the category where the back rent program is gonna need to be funded.
And that was through legal aid, has been working on that.
And I think when you look at the URAP proposal, embedded in there are, where back rent eviction prevention can happen. I think those are longer term as opposed to, but the question of, as the subsidies step down, what position people are in is a good question. But the anticipation that some eviction prevention for the avoiding that and paying off back rent is embedded in some of the stabilization pieces that continue longer.
So we'll have to sort through and figure that out.
And we do have, and in my folder of requests, we do have a funding request increase for 24 for legal aid because they anticipate they're gonna have a lot more work to do with association conditions. So that's just gonna be on our wish list to consider. All right, I'm gonna move on. So we're gonna say, yes, we wanna continue, but we aren't doubling it. We're just making it 850 on property jobs recommend. So now we're down to global commitment, which will, but Senator Perchlik's an expert now. Count on him.
Could you explain it, please?
So
He's had a tutorial already.
this is the section that has the most moving pieces, as you can see in the governor's change column. The biggest changes are related to the staff group in terms of caseload and cost, but also the FMAP changes that are happening. That's why you see that enormous down on the general fund side, being offset by an up in the federal fund line. And Ziva came in and presented those pieces. The House changes and are noted below. They made changes related to skilled nursing home rates, the Medicare economic index for the rate that goes to the FQHCs, and for Medicaid transportation. And the FQHC calculated rate is correct. The timing and the amount that's in for the home health tied to 90% of Medicare, I think needs a technical correction according to the memo. And what you see over, there's actually numbers showing in the Senate column change on this, and that's, we talked about yesterday, is getting caught up to the emergency board. So that's all you're seeing right now in the Senate
So that's
change.
updating to
Yeah.
the
And if you are agreeing with the House's additions related to home health and FQHC and Medicaid transportation, we would just do the technical correction recommended in the memo related to the home health rate increases.
What is the Medicaid transportation?
Medicaid transportation is provided, I'm the historian on this.
Yeah, please.
Under Medicaid, there's a requirement that people are assured access to the services. And so for someone to go to a doctor's appointment or whatever, if they don't have their own transportation and can't get there, we rely on our public transit agencies to get the transport them. And oftentimes it's a volunteer driver who gets paid, you know, the mileage. And we, about 15 million right now is what Medicaid is paying to help get Medicaid beneficiaries to healthcare. Sometimes it's going trips to Boston, to Syracuse, to Albany. And what they've done is Medicaid or DEVA has put forward a rate. And so it's not based on utilization. So if people are very high frequent users, or you have to take patients to Boston or whatever, it's a fixed rate. And so they are in our area, which is very rural, they're running a deficit. And there's a recognition on the part of DEVA that the methodology just does not work. Some public transit entities have been affected more than others. A lot depends on, you know, what they're running for routes. The other thing that came in is everything was fare free, and Medicaid says if it's free to everybody else, you can't charge Medicaid beneficiaries. So the fare free policy impacted revenues as well. So what we have here is an effort to recognize that we've got these public transit, they're community-based, as we know, that are required to provide the transportation, but their costs are not being met. And so this is a request that is coming in. This Human Services in the House, I think, took the testimony, and this is recommending based on the request that came from the Public Transit Association, the amount of money to address their shortfalls by providing this essential and required service to these individuals.
Is that, are those trips all audited, or how do we know it?
They're audited. They're audited.
The interesting thing is how many people we hear from who would say, why can't I be dropped off at the grocery store on my way to the doctor's office and pick that and go back to the doctor's office. So there's a huge need for transportation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So years ago, Medicaid transportation used to be done by social services, and it just was not working. And I'm back in the 80s, Dick. And so, so that was back in my social welfare days. And so what we decided would make a whole lot of sense, because the Agency of Transportation gets federal funding from elderly, it's called EMD, elderly and disabled funding. And so it was a way of taking the Medicaid mandate and the Medicaid dollars to help support that public transit infrastructure. So it was a way of meeting multiple goals and braiding two federal funding streams. And so they've been providing this transportation services to the Medicaid beneficiaries since the 80s. And it's a really, it's essential. And some people, as they say, they've had very costly trips because of people having to go long distances, or to Dartmouth Hitchcock for treatment, or to Burlington. And so a lot depends on, you know, location relative to these sites. Their language, though, we would we need to fix the language because it doesn't really
So there,
work.
the House did not put any, I don't think any language in with the 1.7 that they added from.
Oh, they did not. Well, we need to put some language in because different agencies are in different places.
The ability to,
Yeah.
to fill the gaps with this and.
So that's what it is. It's to deal with the reimbursement shortcomings and the costs that have been reflected. And they are audited, and because also, just like the federal dollars for E&D are audited as well.
And it would say that the audits that they do on medication will allow the stuff for groceries on the way. That's exactly right.
They're paying for Medicaid. So I don't know, on the healthcare reimbursements, Ginny, do you have any thoughts here?
Which where are we?
Well, the House added,
The FQHC piece is just keeping up with that index, and you did that last year, it's just timing, it usually falls into the budget
I've
adjustment.
heard from my FQHC already.
and the Medicaid transportation, I've already, but I thought Medicaid, oh, that's only the federal portion, okay. And so
Are you looking at the nurse, at the skilled home health or?
no, I was looking at the,
Medicare.
If you look at the note under B307 in the memo.
Yeah.
It's, so,
it was,
Economic index for the federal.
no, I was
no,
talking
it's the home
about,
health skilled nursing rates.
Yeah.
no, Stephanie, I
Oh,
was,
sorry.
I'm looking at the 648 is the funds for Medicaid transportation.
That's the general fund,
And then
and then
down
the federal
below
funds, is
is
the,
a federal.
that, those two together get you to 1.7.
And so it's in both lines, because you need the match and then you've got your federal funds.
This is the line where we appropriate the dollars.
So the 90% for skilled home health rate to 90%, did we do that last year too, with Medicare?
I don't recall doing that last year, but as proposed by the House, this reflects an annualized amount, so if the funding was intended to be prorated, the proposed rate increase, if you were doing it from January, from the budget adjustment on for the 23 calendar year, as opposed to an annual fiscal year.
This is too high.
This is too high for this. You would want, it does cause an add in the 24 budget. So what, it's for the remaining, you have to catch up the 24 with a full year.
So does that mean the House put in more than we needed to?
For the budget adjustment, you put in a little bit more that's needed here.
Is it-
But it does,
How many months is that for?
4.5 months it would be with the timing. We can't, as I understand it, we can't do retroactive on this one. We can't go back, but that's what I understood from Sarah was the note on the technical side. And so we would fund 4.5 months here, and then we have to remember that we did that and continue to fund it in 24.
Then you've got to annualize it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the same thing with the FQHC rates.
But what they did is they went back to the beginning of the fiscal year.
I believe they did, that's what it's written. And I'll double check with Sarah, but I think that's what you're seeing in the note in the memo.
Generally speaking, at least, we'll make whatever corrections are necessary, but these additions and
I'd be in favor of
the package.
the package.
Everybody all clear? Any other questions on it?
Yeah.
All right, so if we have to make the adjustment for just the 4.5 months, Stephanie,
We'll
see what
do
those
that
numbers
numbers
look
decide
like.
it needs to happen.
And as you notice, down at the last boxes, this is what we did yesterday. And it has to update to the latest case load at PMPM. Okay, so let's close that. Human Services Board.
That's it's a freed up amount of money. It's an adjustment to the actual need in 23. So
Healthcare, 306.
306 has lots of moving pieces in it, mostly related
Not
to
too
the-
much.
Well, if you're looking at the governor's change column first, so you're looking at two columns when you're reading this document.
Yeah, I know, there's 5.8 there.
So the big chunk of money in there is 4.7 of that 5.8 is that data warehouse project. It looks like, and then buy and caseload is, no, that's on the wrong line. Actually, it's more, it's like, it's 5.7 of this is the warehouse project, looks like. That you're seeing here.
All right, and then the house made,
So the house has changed, it should have a comment, but, coordinated care team to provide case management, wraparound services in PA, they're adding that on the general fund. Let's see what the note has.
Reducing federal funds. Is that because of eligibility?
So it's saying you have to pay for, so it's embedded in the underlying amount of funding, it's just the funding source is switching to the general fund from federal funds. I
Is
just
there a
wanna-
reason for that?
well, must be the federal funding,
Doesn't cover, but,
or something where maybe it wasn't eligible.
yeah.
Coordinated care teams.
Case management is back.
This is one where the memo is also having that quarter versus half a year question. But I will I'll talk to Sarah Clark about why the federal funding is going down in
all
this
right.
proposal.
All right. So obviously, we'll get an explanation, but what we're doing is preserving that level of service.
Yeah.
Appears for some reason the federal funding isn't as much, and is
These
this,
are wraparound services are not eligible.
it could be, but with that, we'll get a further explanation, but I guess the question as to why the federal funds went away and had to be replaced, but to preserve these services, if that is necessary because of the loss in federal funding, are people feeling that this is, that it's important to continue these services? In case, these are the GA emergency and transitional housing coordinated teams. Okay, all right, so we'll find out the reason, but we certainly want to preserve the coordinated care team presence for this population. All right, we're moving on to
307 is the same conversation we just had in 301. This is where you see it as a global commitment fund dollar as opposed to a state and federal dollar. On the transportation, a portion of the FQHC, another portion of that runs in another section. And then the 1.2 for the skilled home health piece, that would be, we would change that number to reflect 4.5 months.
let me ask, in home health, that's all in DEMA, even though it supports Vale.
It's the skilled home health. So it's after a stay and stuff, you know, it's not the home and community based, it's the nature of the service.
Might be the high-tech kit.
Or the, after a hospital stay, it's the nursing.
Okay. So 307 is just really, with,
And on the home health piece, it would be reflecting the months that can be covered.
so this is just making the changes that are necessary with the expenditures we've already agreed we want to make. And that is deal with the Medicaid, deal with the Medicare, FQHC, and the skilled nursing rate. The thing that's confusing about global commitment is it's reflected in the, at the agency level. It's reflected in two different places because
Everything in the global commitment world takes 2 transactions.
But the experts explain why that.
Well, because the agency is a big washing
No,
machine.
Senator Burke.
Oh, yeah, all right, Senator Birchlick, why is it there twice?
I think you did a good job.
Now, we're down to 309.
309 is the state-only appropriation in Medicaid. That is where the clawback lives, where a portion of the pharmacy program, and where the cost-sharing portion of the program for folks that buy their insurance on the exchange that are above income, within an income band, are the cost-sharing portion. And the changes here are, this is also where the Brattleboro Retreat payments coming through. And so there's a funding shift from GC to GF in this line item in the state only. And that's, it's a portion of the retreat that is IMD that we pay for now with general fund dollars.
But, so there are multiple reasons for the reduction.
So you see a reduction in global commitment fund and an up in the general fund. And the other piece that's down, so the piece that's down in global commitment is because the 4.6 of it is because the retreat has to move to general fund.
Is that because of the?
And then the other piece, they're both retreat related, so the net. So this is one where I want to check the Diva's ups and down sheet, and I have more explanation on it than the Adam sheet. But it basically,
Just a moment.
there's an ACO reconciliation embedded in this as well. That's another piece. So that's a $7 million up netted against the two pieces of the Brattleboro Retreat, which are a $6 million down.
All right, well, it's all right in here in the
Yes.
Viva document. Okay, and if we want to go back to it, it'll explain why they're having to make these adjustments. And some of it with the retreat is the phase down of what we can use for an IMD, Institution of Mental Disease. And so they're having to shift a portion of that money from global commitment investment to general fund.
No, the ACO, I'm sorry, that's in the wrong line, it's so close together. That's actually in the global commitment line.
And then the other thing that they did at the retreat is the alternative payment model with the retreat, and that increased the per diem from $2,550 to $3,100. So there's several impacts on the retreat.
Those pieces are up in the section 307, but not in section 30.
No, but I'm just citing, we have a whole host of things happening with the retreat in
Yes.
terms of the payment, in terms of the phase down. And so you're gonna double check the numbers, but it seems that unless we want to revisit for the Diva testimony,
Yeah.
we're pretty much concurring that this is an adjustment based on actual. And so I'm going to suggest we close it out. Otherwise, we're just going to be agonizing all the moving pieces. But I don't think it's anything that is other than just technical adjustments based on several factors at work here. Nothing. And then what we have in the next section, which is the 310. And that is just the Senate bringing it up to date with the emergency board. I'm on page 7.
Yep.
So
And this is where the buying caseload in the governor's change fund, you see that. You see a little bit of, a tiny amount of the ACO reconciliation is also in this governor's change fund. And and then you see some carry forward that's being taken out.
So all we're doing is really reflecting what we agreed to at the e-board that we updated. PMPs. House made no changes. Now this is just using the latest. All right, B311, the House made no change, the House made no changes. The governor was 473. And I think that, was that just moving from one?
So there's an up in the ADS service level agreements, the internal service fund charge for support from digital services. And they also had some pay act carry forward to offset that. So that's what the net of the 473 is, the two moving pieces in there.
Anybody want to spend more time on that? Public health. Public health. What does it say on the spreadsheet?
On the general fund, the pieces that are going up are,
So personal services went up almost 1.2.
Yeah.
And general, and it was all general fund.
Yeah.
Oh, we have, yeah. I'm going to suggest we just break here, because Senator Bruce and I, we're scheduled for a break from 2:30 to 3. And then we're gonna have Gus Sealer come in at 3. We'll pick it up as we go along. We'll just keep plodding through this. It's pretty-
So did you close out street 12 or?
Stephanie was just telling us
yeah,
what it
the
is.
notes on this, as big spreadsheet don't actually tell you why personal services, that tells you where the money carry forward that came in. But it doesn't tell why the personal services up. I think we'd have to look at Dr. Lippman's note on that.
Well, we can.
I assume we're gonna talk to Gus about the money.
Yes, we are.
He's probably in favor of it, but that's against it.
At the 51.
The question might be one of time, Nathan.
No, I mean, I'm
Part of
just
the
saying.
question is, how much has he got back in the pipeline, and can he get it all through?
I
And
was just commenting that we're just making